Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Refounding Democracy. We're doing, as we said, a four-part series live from Ukraine, where right now it's Athena, I and Pini are. I'm Athena Small, coming to you live from Kiev, Ukraine. I'm actually in the offices of the buildings of the Kiev School of Economics, where I'm doing some teaching. Joining me is co-host, also from Kiev's Pini Ben-Or, also teaching at Kiev School of Economics. We're doing short courses in these 3 weeks. And joining us as co-host is Peter Lupu, the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Glendale Community College in Glendale, Arizona, in the Phoenix area. We are very pleased this week to be discussing really central question for, I'd say, for the world, which is about Ukraine and how it's doing in its challenges associated with the brutal assault of Russia since the full invasion started in February 24th of 2022. We're today going to focus on Ukraine's education system. This is, of course, a central, in a way, a battleground, both physically with a lot of material resources being disrupted and destroyed, and also ideologically, conceptually, that Russia is attacking not just Ukraine physically, but is attacking the idea of Ukraine and attacking Ukraine's autonomous ability to chart its own path and to define itself as a nation. That is at the essence of what the fight is about. And that's why we're really keen and excited to welcome three guests today who can speak from their experience in the working in and various in different roles within Ukraine's education system, and who have given some thought to Ukraine, the future of this system. So very pleased to have with us first Timothy Brick. Timothy is a sociologist, and he is the rector, which is, we translate basically provost, of the Kiev School of Economics. And I'm hoping that Timothy will have a chance to tell us a little about KSE's mission and why at this moment he's not back with us in Kiev, but is in fact joining us from the U.S., from the Bay Area, from Palo Alto, where he's on a grand tour of the world. We're also joined by Taras Tsimbal. He is, I know him as Taras, so I have to, he's associate professor of sociology and vice dean for science and international relations at the Faculty of Sociology at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. If you don't know, that's arguably one of the most high-profile, prestigious universities in Ukraine. He was a Fulbright scholar at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and is currently conducts research at the University of Constance, Germany. He is joining us from Germany today. We're also joined by Tatiana Peresunko, my apologies. She is a sociology student who is one of many, many students who have left Ukraine during the hostilities and is currently finishing her bachelor's in sociology at the University of Helsinki, Finland, and she is joining us from Helsinki. So thank you, welcome all three of you, really excited to get your perspectives and talk about this. I'm going to start with Timothy. Can you tell us, there's a few things we want to talk about, but we want to talk about ultimately what is going to be happening and what's the vision of where Ukraine's education system is going and where it needs to go. But I want to start with what's happening right now. What's happening for Kiev School of Economics, and how have you adapted? I'm sure people are very interested to know how have you adapted, what has the war meant for you, and how have you adapted your operations?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I think you were very modest when you quickly mentioned about your presence in Kiev. In fact, Athena and Pini have helped Ukraine quite a lot. Athena has a second visit to Kiev already. She arrived to Kiev last year in the midst of the war to teach to Ukrainian students. Now we're also happy to have Pini in person. He did some teaching online a year ago, so this is a huge contribution. And thank you very much for your enthusiasm and for your courage and for your support. This is truly magnificent. To answer to your question, I'm a sociologist and I studied this.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mistake. Never mind. Let's move on then to. Oh, sorry. Go. I was joking. You please continue.
Well, I got it very seriously. So
sorry.
Okay. No. It's, okay. So
you're a sociologist.
Following to your question. I was trying to say that, when I was a student, and Taras was one of my senior friends, I think he was a PhD student and one of my professors. So he told me about these fancy words like human capital, social capital, and other concepts. And I kind of read a lot of papers about that, but I never understood what they mean. And I think this is only the first time in my life when I feel it, when I understand what it means to have human and social capital. So universities in Ukraine right now, they are the hubs of smart, capable, creative and brave people who feel this sense of community and who help their peers and who help their communities basically to survive through this war. Universities, they were very quick to adapt to this war by providing necessary policy advice, by helping others to move and relocate, by collecting new data, faculty and students of many universities, they actually volunteer to serve in the military or to be volunteers. So universities appeared to be one of the pillars of resilience of Ukraine. And I'm very proud to be a part of this ecosystem. I had a bit of a crisis, thinking like, why am I working here? Should I quit? What's the point of writing papers and teaching students? And it is now that I actually realize that being a part of university is one of the best things that I have done in my life. So I know that, it's more an emotional answer to your question. It's not very analytical, but I think a lot of my colleagues, share this emotion right now. And in terms, what is happening here on the ground, of course, Ukrainian educational system has suffered a lot from this war. There are a lot of, open data, and KYIV has collected data on damages. We know that in total, Ukrainian infrastructure has suffered a lot, and the total costs are amounted for $143 billion for the whole infrastructure in Ukraine. Almost 9 billion of it. 9 billion is about educational systems. Wow. So, it's schools, universities, institutions, departments. So a lot of infrastructure was destroyed. We know that
sorry, that's physical damage to structures and damage. That's a lot of buildings. That's a lot of
it's a lot of buildings. It's a lot of labs. It's a lot of departments. We know that 25 universities, starting from this full-scale aggression, 25 universities, and on top of that, 19 departments were reallocated, meaning that they had to move from one city to another city. Wow. And they are now geographically, dispersed in different parts of Ukraine.
So so imagine like University of California at Santa Barbara has to move to Colorado or something. It's like that kind of scale. It's an astonishing scale of
which means that students, faculty have to move. It means a certain agility. So a part why this happened relatively quickly is because Ukraine has some experience with that. The war started in 2014, and some universities from the occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, they had to move to other parts of Ukraine in 2014. And students and faculty, which also means, a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork. It's not just about physical transformation. It's also about making decisions how you choose a city where a university has to go to. So our bureaucrats, our governmental and servants, they had some experience in dealing with these issues. So that's why they were more or less quick to adapt to the situation. I can say the same about, the government in general. It reacted relatively quickly by adjusting to new realities. So we know that, suppose it would speak about admission campaign. So the admission campaign was changed slightly. Pupils in Ukraine, they have to go through these standardized tests in order to be admitted to the universities. So these tests were changed in the content a bit, to make them more accessible. A lot of offices, these physical locations when kids, they can go to go through these tests. These offices were opened in more than 22 countries outside of Ukraine. So again, it was a very quick adjustment.
Right, because there was an enormous shift of population that had to immediately move to Poland, Moldova, lots of
Exactly. So these offices were open like in Romania, in Hungary, in Poland, so quite a lot of more than 20,000 kids were able to participate in these exams, in standardized testing. Bureaucratic things like accreditation of programs. Usually there is a schedule for accreditation, but it were postponed. And maybe for your audience it means little, but for us it means a lot, meaning that the governmental machine changed bureaucratic processes during the war relatively quickly. It's for our government, I would say, it's a success. Mm-hmm. And in terms of actual kind of personal experiences, I myself I stayed in Kiev. Right now I'm in California, but for the past 13 months I had been in Kiev with some of my colleagues and some of my students. So it was a bit, obviously it was scary, but we decided to stay there to support our families and our communities. And the university also reacted quite quickly to the war. So we operate, like my university, I will be speaking now about our experience. So Kyiv School of Economics is divided in 3 pillars. It's a university, it's a think tank, and a charitable foundation. And the charitable foundation used to be engaged mostly with education, like scholarships, admission campaigns. But when the invasion started, they pivoted to support Ukrainian military and civilians, and they fundraised for these 13 months. They fundraised more than $45 million to purchase medical kits, helmets, to rebuild schools and clinic in Ukrainian, in north of Kyiv region. And the reason they were able to do that is because our charitable foundation is registered in Washington, D.C., not only in Ukraine. So we were able to fundraise internationally. Then the think tank has collected a lot of data about damages to Ukrainian infrastructure and economy. So most likely whenever you see something online or you see some governmental reports about Ukrainian damages, these data were produced by our think tank. And they're working on sanctions towards Russia. This MACFO Yermak group includes our think tank. And the university, as any other academic institution, continues to provide education and research. We moved to online education in about 3 weeks of the invasion. And then we built bomb shelters. So our students can study on campus. And I think it's just the privilege of being private and small university. So we are a relatively small university compared to other universities in Ukraine. So we had, more flexibility and resources to build bomb shelters. So our students can study underground in classrooms with internet and whiteboards and desks when the air alarm happens.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able, to encourage international faculty to visit and to teach, like yourself, but also economists from London School of Economics, from the University of Chicago. We hosted Prime Minister of Netherlands and Prime Minister of Sweden. So we were able, to build these facilities that are good enough for education, but also for events, and it really helped. It really helped to tie community together. I think our students were quite happy to be in person on campus. Some of our students proposed to have night overs. They during the winter, our master students, they were gathering, in the university, and they were sleeping in the university in tents, doing homework, playing video games. So this sense of community is quite important during the war.
That even in the darkest hour, this light is still on, and the university is functioning, the community is functioning. This is inspiring. Taras, you are also working on the administrative, let's say, front lines for Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev, and you've also had to respond to, I know, some quite dramatic threats and challenges. Can you tell us about how you had to move quickly and how you responded?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ethan, for hosting us and for doing these amazing streams, which will help to understand both what's going on in Ukraine and in-depth understanding of what's going on in Ukraine, as well as the prospects of democracy and Ukraine as a front line of democracy in the current situation. So, as I mentioned, I am also working in the administrative wing. I'm Vice Dean for Science and International Relations, but in addition to that, I do some other special tasks which are closely related to adaptation to the situation of war, to crisis management, and so on. I fully agree with Timothy here in his analysis of why Ukraine and Ukrainian educational system proved to be so resilient in the conditions of war. I just want to mention two other factors, very important factors, which contributed to our ability to get back to work so quickly. The first one was the process of digitalization in Ukraine, which was started quite a few years ago after the revolution of 2014. We have a Ministry of Digital Transformation, which is, by the way, headed by a sociology credit. So, yeah. Well, we are very biased in this.
Yes. Team sociology is acquitting itself well. Very good.
Yes, so we are promoting ourselves. We are using this.
Do you also run the railroads? Because I noticed that works well too.
Okay, we can discuss that later.
Okay.
Yeah, so digitalization and Ukraine made huge steps in that direction. And thanks to this process, identification of people is possible with digital documents rather than papers. And it helped immensely for many people who were fleeing from burned, destroyed apartments or buildings. And this is not only about IDs, it's also about different proofs of IDP status and so on. So it was very timely for Ukraine to move digitalization so far before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And the other
Before we move on, can you just say a little more about what does that mean, digitalization? I mean, what does that imply, and why was it so important for the
Okay,
response?
by digitalization, we mean that some governmental services were moved to online platforms. We can do a lot of things with special apps on our gadgets. We can use them to prove our identity, to prove our COVID vaccination, to show our tax
Compliance.
tax number. Yeah, yes. To submit our taxes, to submit declaration to the tax administration, to obtain different proofs of employment, number of years you worked, and so on. So many of these things can be done online without any need to go to physical offices.
Right. So
and
you
so,
can, you can imagine, therefore, if you suddenly have to shift from Kharkiv to Lviv or to Poland, you can still be plugged into the government services that you need, and things are going to
absolutely.
go much.
And in addition, since this app was connected to geo services, you can prove your location, and therefore many internally displaced people didn't have to go to offices to get governmental benefits in the first months of war when they needed them most. So it was
really
very easy.
Mm-hmm. So I had that's very useful background, and I frankly, I'm going to chime in with my perspective that Ukraine is actually ahead of the U.S. in many states in the U.S. in its program of digitalization. There are many of the things that you can do on your smartphone in Ukraine that you still have to go to physical offices for in the U.S.
In fact, it was one of the eye-opening experiences for many Ukrainian refugees in the EU countries who faced situations when many European societies are less digitally advanced than Ukrainian, and problems related to that.
Yeah.
So another factor which was important in preparing Ukraine for this challenge was COVID-19 pandemic, because we learned a lot during that time. We went online, and in fact, my university, I believe many other universities as well, worked online for almost 2 years of the pandemic. My university is very huge.
About how many students do you have total at the university?
30,000 students,
okay.
Which is the second largest in Ukraine. The largest one is Polytechnic Institute in Kyiv. So we didn't have a chance to stay in classrooms during COVID because of the large number of students and all this restrictions on the number of people who can be present in one place with social distance and all that stuff. So the only choice was to go online. And for that reason, when the thing started on the 24th of February, everyone knew what to do. Mm-hmm. We just needed the time to find where faculty members are, to find where students are, to connect to them. The classes were suspended on the second day of war until the 1st of April. And my university decided that we will go back to classes on the 1st of April. And by the time, all faculties, all institutes had to prepare for the classes. And in fact, this is what we did. The first day of war was quite dramatic, but I got a phone call at 7 in the morning from vice rector requesting that I go to office and we discuss how to deal with this emergency. We had classes on the first day, online classes, of course, just to as Timothy mentioned, to serve as a kind of example, as a kind of hub, which brings a sense of stability to the society. We wanted to show that this event didn't shake the foundations of our system. We're here, we are doing our work, and we will continue to do it. I had 3 classes on the first day of war, like listening to the fighter jets flying just behind the window, and my window panes shaking sometimes. But still we did that. And then the administration of the university gave us a few days to solve our family issues, to bring our families to safety, and then we started preparing for renewal of studies.
So it's quite
yeah,
dramatic.
okay.
Of course, in the very first, really quite frightening hours, we all saw the photos of the President Zelensky and the core of his administration saying, "We are still here in Kiev," and this was, in a way, the most. Although you could say it's only symbolic, because that by itself doesn't say bring down an enemy fighter jet. It is, in some way, this was the most critical moment of the entire conflict. This was when it became clear that the government in Kiev was not going to be swept away in the initial hours, and that this was that Ukraine was still standing and defiant. And so I imagine it must have been quite frightening for a lot of the students and quite unsettling. And so having the university standing there saying, "We are here, we are working, we are still with you," I can imagine was quite important. I'm actually...
We were well aware that we need to do this, that we need to show that we are here. And the rector of my university didn't leave Kyiv for the first 2 or 3 months of the war, even for a single day. Mm-hmm. And so we all stayed there. We understood that we have to be with our students, we have to be with our buildings, with our papers, mm-hmm. Because it's important to prevent panicking and to show that we will be back.
Yeah, and even as clearly you were taking substantial physical risk and to safety to do this. So Tatiana, you were in your you were there at Taras Shevchenko National University. I guess you were in Kiev on February 24th, 2022, and I'm supposing this was... No, you were not?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, where were you?
Home in Zhytomyrsky Oblast.
Okay, so that's about what, 100 kilometers west-northwest of Kiev? Is that about right?
Yes, near the Belarus.
Near Belarus border. So in a way, also quite an active and scary area.
We were waiting for the tanks from Belarus, and thankfully that didn't happen.
But how was it like for you?
I'm just trying to process everything Taras just said, because I didn't know his part of the story, how he had 3 classes back on that day. Me and my family actually fled. Me and my mother and my other relatives fled on 3rd day of war to Poland, and I was there for approximately 3 weeks. And then Taras messaged all of my colleagues asking if we are interested in a mobility program with the University of Helsinki, and I just was really glad he gave us that chance, and it actually happened. And in 2 weeks I was in Helsinki. I'm still trying to process. Yeah, I'm still trying to process last spring, actually, because it was extremely chaotic. So me being in another country, I wasn't even like ever thinking about. It's a point where I should have like navigate my cultural identity there and just try to I don't know, go back to my studies as quickly as possible and be like a proper student. I'm always trying to be. Yes, and through the whole year of war, I had um, noticed a lot of changes in structure of my studies, because I'm still studying at the Faculty of Sociology at the Taras Shevchenko University of Kyiv. Plus, I was having some courses back at the University of Helsinki, and this mix of different educational systems gave me broader perspective, and I'm very glad that today I have an opportunity to like step back from the academic domain I'm always in and to try to look at the probably wider picture of what we are going to do after the war and how we will navigate the situation later. But as for now, I have just noticed a shift in how my faculty feels to me, not only on a personal level, but on an organizational level. Because for now, it feels like every faculty and institution at my university has like their own thing to do, and even though they are organized and the bureaucracy is working and it as well, it feels like we are not as mobilized as we were back when the war just happened. So I feel mostly like the second year of war weakened a lot of structures at the university, especially student organizations. I'm head of a Lone Society of Students at our faculty, and it was extremely difficult for me this year than the last year to like propose some ideas and try to make some projects come true at our faculty. And it also can be seen at the conferences we're making at the faculty. So people, they're just not interested in them, or just try to stay away from not only like educational and scientific events, but like some fun events at our faculty. And it's I don't know, it has been very not not to be emotional and to say wow it was painful, but as a self-proclaimed nerd and a positive person, it deeply feels. And I just want to see a broader picture and reflect on it a bit.
Well, first, I want to thank you for sharing that. I want to affirm that emotions matter a lot in this, and you have nothing to apologize for. In fact, it's a gift, and I appreciate your talking about the emotional side of this. Taras has his hand up, and I want to get to him in just a minute, but I want to say what I was hearing was that you are so there was the initial surge of response, and that was both very chaotic and difficult, but also you felt a great sense of solidarity and a great sense of people mobilizing to take care of their students, and that now it's not that they no longer take care, but it's rather that a lot of people sort of administratively having been taken care of, that sense of energy and solidarity is maybe dissipated, or it doesn't feel as salient and right here, right now in the moment. Is that a fair description?
Yes, but even at the start of the war, I still managed to feel lost, even though yeah, everyone was working on it. But as for now, yes, I feel that energy has shifted to just keeping a bare minimum.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, that's tough. Taras, please, you had something to add. Please jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment to give you an example how the return to classes in April last year was in demand. Before the 1st of April, the university asked the professors to be as mild as possible towards students. So if they cannot attend classes online, we should not demand that, because not everyone is well connected. The infrastructure, internet was weakened at the time. And we saw that many people were under stress, many students were under stress, so they were not ready for doing their studies. But I had a first class after the 1st of April, several days later, and I expected that not so many students will show up, and that in the end we will talk 20 minutes about how to organize our interaction in the coming months.
So just kind of the administrative minimum with some number of students, yeah.
And everything will be done individually. But to be honest, I even didn't prepare for that class because I expected that class will not take place. But when I met students and I asked them how they wish to proceed, everyone in that particular class responded that we want to have classes according to the schedule, because it brings structure.
Yes.
It brings stability into our daily life. We are too disturbed by the news. We need something that happens that on schedule and shows us that things are stable and controllable in the country. So we didn't miss even a single class after that till the end of semester. And it was April when Russian troops were just 50 kilometers or 20 kilometers from the capital. Yeah, wow. This is it.
An astonishing response. And do you feel like, I'm going to ask Tatiana and Taras, that during that time the university managed to provide not only that structure for the students and of course the continuation of classes, per se, the education per se, but also to be that that light in the dark, if you will, that sense of community. Did the sense of community around this, let's say, the student and population maybe change?
Yes, we clearly realized this responsibility, and the university was doing a lot. Just from my point of view, I was receiving messages about evacuation trains and quarters for our university. I was distributing these messages to students and helping them to sometimes helping them to get from the campus to a railway station and to other places. My university negotiated with universities in Western Ukraine who had facilities, who had dormitories to host our students fleeing from Kyiv. We were doing these evacuation tasks. Also, we were preparing, of course, just in case, our personal files of students and faculty members for evacuation, because you should not let that end up in the hands of an enemy.
Yes.
Also, university was arranging shelters in student dormitories. We supplied these shelters with everything we had. One day, I just walked across all rooms with my dean in the university building, and we took everything that all pieces of food, stationery, furniture, everything that possibly could be needed in student shelters in the dormitories, and we brought all that stuff to the camp, to student residential houses. Well, in addition to that, many students were contacting us, asking to provide documents. So some students asking for documents to go to the military, to join either the territorial defense units or the armed forces of Ukraine.
So, and just for the context, that's maybe roughly equivalent to the National Guard and the regular armed forces, say, in the U.S.
Yeah. So it's a kind of like a militia and regular armed forces. And many of them went to defend the country in the first days of war. By the way, many were rejected by the conscription officers because of lack of combat experience. Conscription, despite all the chaos taking place in these days, the conscription officers also acted according to the regulations. And despite the need for personnel, they rejected those who were vulnerable, who were not prepared. So some students were even in despair and talked to me for days that they cannot go and fight. They were looking for any opportunities to do that. Then, of course, we understood that we have to stay active on social media and to support our pages on Facebook, Instagram, and so on, so that everyone sees that we're here, we're working. And also we started arranging these makeshift exchange programs, like the one with the University of Helsinki, which started with one letter from a professor in Helsinki who sent it to accidental email address email address she accidentally found on our website. It was not even the office address. It was a professor's address who forwarded the message to me, and I didn't ignore it. I was just any opportunity I saw at that time, I tried to use it to help the students, because I knew the first thing when the war happens, we need to save, we need to rescue the next generation, and to create all possible conditions for them to continue their studies. Because security, national security, is not only about military; it's also about educated people who will build the future of this country. I studied the Russian-Chechen war for some time, and the Russian strategy in that war was quite clear: to destroy educated elite in order to make this nation headless, to decapitate this nation. So it was very clear on my mind that I have to help these young people and make sure that they will continue their studies with my university or outside my university. It doesn't matter.
It makes it very real when you look at history, where a invading force targets education people, cultural institutions, educational institutions, archives, libraries. They're specifically targeted, and realizing that you are living this stage of history. You're actually you're saving the books from the library and saving the people in this stage of history. It's quite a dramatic activity.
Yes, well, we were very historically aware at that moment that this is something very momentous, and we have to live up to the expectations in order to not to be ashamed to talk about those days later.
Right.
And
So this, and it's quite impressive, as Timothy was saying earlier, about the role of the university, not just teaching, but being part in a wide spectrum, part of the response of society. And I know I also was asking, well, what can I do to help? From back in the U.S. and thinking, well, yeah, I don't know how to fight. I don't know. I also don't have military training, so maybe I guess there's nothing I can do. But actually, I'm very pleased that our opinion. I'm very pleased that we have been able to, I think, make a genuine contribution in not even without firing weapons. That the whole country, the whole society is what resists and fights back, not only the front lines. Do you, Timothy? Do you see the role of and now that unfortunately things have pressed on for over 14 months? Do you see the role of the university in the conflict changing, and have you had any opportunity to think about even the short-run future?
Yes, I think the university's role has changed slightly, or I would rather say expanded slightly in this sense. So universities were first responders by offering their premises and shelters to civilians and military. They were helping with providing analytics to the government and
by the way,
international.
I want to know, when I was teaching last June here, I was up on the 4th floor teaching, because on the 1st floor all of the classrooms were full of people in camouflage doing certain military things. I didn't inquire in detail because I didn't want to sound like I was snooping, but clearly the university was very much part of the facilities response, at least.
Never just random people walking by.
They just happen to all be wearing camo. Okay.
Yeah.
It's still the case, by the way, on a 4th floor.
Yeah. Don't say which floor they're on and what they're doing. Please continue, Timothy.
Yes. Yeah. And but now I think universities have adapted to do something else beyond that. We know that our friends and partners from north, like from Sumy, or from the west, Ukrainian Catholic University, they're helping to rebuild communities. So they actually travel to local communities to help local governance and NGOs and IDPs, internally displaced people, with some humanitarian aid, with to help with psychological support and mental health issues. So I think now universities have become a big part of this kind of healing process, even though the war is still very much on, it's very active. Nevertheless, we cannot wait for the war to end to start rebuilding and healing, and universities are a big part of that. And another thing is universities have become quite active part of diplomacy and advocacy campaigns around the world. Even starting from Zelensky himself, I think it was clear that a big part of his international agenda was that he traveled, when he online visited different countries. He also visited Science Po, he visited Oxford, he talked to the Association of American Universities. So there is a strong signal, that academia is a big part of international diplomatic effort. And I think Ukrainian universities, departments, administration, they all participate in this effort as well. So even myself, I'm in the US right now. I'm teaching a short spring course in Northwestern University as a Roberta Buffett visiting professor at the Buffett Institute of Global Affairs. And the head of this institution, Annalise Rice, it's actually her expertise. She's writing papers about how universities can work as as diplomatic institutions.
Oh.
And and that's what actually happens now in practice. Yes, so university deans and administrators, they either talk online or they send a lot of emails or they talk in person to convince stakeholders, diplomats, donors, students, associations to support Ukraine and to support Ukraine intellectually, culturally, and in terms of faculty exchange, student exchange, technology exchange. We actually in demand of a lot of smart people. I can give you just a few examples. For instance, a huge problem in Ukraine right now is mining. A lot of territory is mined. So Ukrainian farmers, they have to harvest lands, even though it's very dangerous for their lives because of mines. So what we need technological solutions to solve it. Maybe some new technologies like drones flying over, making photos, and artificial intelligence making image recognition to identify mines and to work out demining efforts. And for that, we need support of international IT community and technological startups. And we can put together Ukrainian startups with international startups as universities, because universities, they provide platform and networks for this kind of operations. And we have been doing it already. And this is just one of the tiny examples of what can be done. And we can go beyond these specific examples to more broad, cultural exchange and ideas exchange. So I think universities have become a big part of that right now. Another example is KYIV Mohyla Academy, which is quite famous university in Ukraine. I think they have a very strong department in history and philosophy, and their professors are talking about decolonization. They're talking about the role of Russia and Ukraine in the modern world, and the fact that Ukraine, through which optics can we understand the war, and the optics of decolonization is a very efficient one, and it was offered by philosophers from KYIV Mohyla Academy. So, and now the world is talking about that. So yeah, I think universities have become a big pillar of international effort to not only to sort of support Ukraine, but also to understand, to make sense of what is happening, and to think about the future of the world.
Yeah, that intellectual work is actually critical. We've been talking about organizational work. We've been talking about teaching. Yes, technical development, but often we lose sight of the importance of core intellectual work in framing how we see the world. And we had actually a great discussion on this channel last week with people from KYIV Mohyla Academy about decolonization. And I noted how as I was being trained in Russian language and literature when I was younger, I drank the Kool-Aid, as you will. I mean, I bought the story about great Russia and it's Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and that Ukraine was kind of peripheral to this great metropole. And when I came to realize sort of what happened, I was really embarrassed about it. And it's not just decolonization. Decolonization of the mind has to happen around the world, and it has to happen for supporters in the West as well. And so this is also central to what universities provide in their response, is giving people new ways to think about how to respond to the conflict. Taras, do you have a view on how the role of universities is changing, and have you had any chance to think about the future for universities in general and Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv in particular?
Well, I can, I agree with Timothy. All the points he mentioned are also valid for my university. Also, my university is a state-run university. By the way, you have a good comparison case here because Timothy represents a private university, while one of the most famous and influential private universities in Ukraine, while I represent a state-run university, very traditional.
Let us note, also extremely prominent and highly regarded public institution.
Well, yes,
Yes.
and also involved in many ideological rivalries with other universities in Ukraine, because very often it is criticized as being too traditional, too inflexible, and all other things. But as we can see in this, in the story of this invasion, some structures which are treated that way, like Ukrainian army, which was not expected to be so effective in resisting Russian invasion. Some structures which are also seem to be rigid, and some people thought rather dead than alive. Still, these structures also have internal sources of flexibility and resilience. So getting back to your question, well, it was and it remains extremely important now for Ukrainian universities and scholars from these universities who are scattered across Europe and across the world at this moment to act as ambassadors of Ukraine and do all these important services that you just mentioned, making Ukraine understandable to the world. My university started this campaign with PhD students back in the spring 2022, asking them to act as ambassadors, and we have this hashtag on Facebook, KNU, which stands for my university, ambassadors, and so on. The idea was that Ukraine is poorly understood by the world. As you mentioned, Ukraine was always treated in the shadow of Russia and not clearly distinguished from Russia. For this reason, many people in the Western academia, even now, still think that this emergence of Ukraine is some kind of CIA plot or conspiracy. Many people in academia think that. So it is important now.
Did you know the CIA was actually working 1,000 years ago? It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And my university probably was founded by
CIA people in the 19th century.
Yes. But still, for many people, it is not clear why Ukraine, having the same background as Russia in 1991 and as Belarus in 1991, in 20 years emerged as something very similar, because if you take comparative studies, you see a lot of similarity between these countries, even in 2010 and so on. So now it is important to show the world that there are deep structural reasons. There are past dependencies. There are historical experiences. The layered demographics of Ukraine, which is different from Russian and Belarusian experiences. Just to make these people supportive of Ukraine, not only for humanitarian reasons, not only out of compassion, but also because of conviction that Ukraine is really different. And this is a very important, we can call it a diplomatic mission. In fact, the universities act as ambassadors and diplomatic missions for Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian history. And this is what many Ukrainian professors do in German and Polish universities, and hopefully, like Timothy in the United States, one of the most reliable allies in this war. In addition to the mission, to the change in role of university, I believe that now universities are switching from being involved in rescuing action to rescue what we had, to rescue students, to rescue our higher educational system from collapse. to more visionary activities. That is, now the universities are more thinking about the future, how to rebuild our curricula, how to rebuild structures, organization, outreach, communication with community, society at large, with power structures in the country in order to be more organically intertwined with the fabric of society in the future. I mean, in the future. In contrast to the Kyiv School of Economics, my university has been a state-run university, and all other state-run universities have a lot of Soviet legacy. Some of this legacy, by the way, is not that bad. And we have to do some smart filtering to preserve good parts of this legacy, maybe small bits of this legacy.
A couple of quick notes. So Kyiv School of Economics was actually started after 1991, if I recall correctly. And second, about the Soviet legacy, I do want to say, having trained in mathematics, the Soviet legacy of advanced research in mathematics and theoretical physics, the high quality of training and consistent high quality of training at, say, high school science and mathematics is something to be very proud of and to nurture and take care of. While, of course, there are other, as anywhere else, also has things to move on from. But I interrupt. Please continue.
Well, yeah, it's okay. Because I have another comment on your comment. Now we are talking more about higher education, but still there is secondary education. And at least from my point of view, secondary education has to preserve even more of the Soviet legacy than the higher education, because it was very effective in developing human capital. Ukrainians proved to be so resistant in this war because each of them had a lot of human capital invested in him or her. This is what I see now in comparative perspective. I've spent last month outside of Ukraine. My family, my kids are studying at secondary schools in another country. I talk to many people who do the same, who have the same situation. And there is a lot of dissatisfaction with secondary education in EU countries among better educated Ukrainians. Because education in EU countries is more focused on development of soft skills, which is good, which is perfect and excellent. But a system, a society can operate with a population which is good in soft skills only when there are people with hard skills who do the job. So you cannot have a sustainable system, self-sustaining system, which puts so much emphasis on only on soft skills. And if you look at European countries, they are all importing professionals from other countries to supply their research, technological development, medical system, and so on. So yeah, this is just a note that we don't have to obliterate what the society has acquired in the Soviet times to prevent this new rupture in the continuity of Ukrainian history.
I'll just give a shout out that Ukraine, well before the conflict, with Russia has developed quite a prominent IT sector and doing not just kind of low-level back office work, but actually launching new products companies. I mean, it's quite a competitive and impressive accomplishment. So.
Exactly, and it was all based on the world-class secondary education system. And concerning your note on mathematics, 2 years ago, the Fields Medal in mathematics was awarded to a professor from my university. Again, this is just to...
Yeah, the Fields Medal, for those who don't know, is basically the Nobel Prize of mathematics. It's the highest honor in the field. Well,
go on.
I wanted to note it's important to celebrate success. We often are rushing to, of course, understandably, from especially in such a challenged period, from one task to move to the next one. But it seems a good moment to celebrate the success of Ukrainian universities in how they stepped up in this critical hour. So you've got a lot to be proud of and a lot of success to build on. I want to really think now about it. You said there are things, Taras, just now, that there are things we want to preserve. There are also some things we need to be. We want, you're saying, the university to be more organically integrated into society. Could you maybe expand a bit on that as a kind of vision of what you see the role of universities being in the Ukraine that's going to emerge after the war? And let me ask alongside that a question that I've been asking for several weeks now. Is a new Ukraine emerging? Am I overseeing things, or maybe it's just the old Ukraine that was there being revealed more? But it looks, as a sympathetic observer, I feel like I'm seeing a society that is changing and in good ways and becoming more confident about itself and having a new sense of its how people relate to each other. What we've been calling the Ukraine social covenant is evolving. Not that it did not have one before, but that it is evolving, and that universities will play a key role in that. Does that resonate for you, or maybe you think about it in different ways? That's asking Taras first. Taras first, and then I'd like to ask Timothy.
We have to be very cautious in our expectations and in answering this particular question. Mm-hmm. Many things depend on the kind of final settlement in this war, and on the readiness and eagerness of Ukraine's allies to support its post-war development. Ukraine is, at this moment, Ukraine is a very exhausted country. I looked at the population pyramid a few days ago, which was
drafted in the what is a population pyramid, for those who don't work in this?
Okay, it's a graph which shows how many people of different age groups and genders live in a country. Okay. And the population pyramid shows that the age groups of people between 20 and 30 is very narrow. And this is the future of country. Yeah. So these are university students, these are future PhD students, and these are future professors and so on. I know from surveys that we did in different countries on Ukrainian refugees that people with higher education and good training are very numerous among those who fled the country because they had human capital to do that. They had to understand which countries they have to go, how to buy tickets. They had some contacts there. They were better in speaking languages of these other countries, or English if they don't speak Polish or German and so on. So the losses, the current demographic losses of Ukraine are disproportionately concentrated in the young age groups and on well-educated people.
And by losses, you mean, I mean, those people are still out there, but they have
these
left.
are temporary
they're
losses.
Temporary losses. They're abroad.
But it depends on the actions of both Ukrainian government and foreign governments if these losses will not turn from temporary to permanent. Yeah. For Western governments, this situation is also, in fact, a demographic opportunity because these are young people, educated people, and so on. So it's tempting for many countries to capitalize on this opportunity. And it all depends on the goodwill of our allied governments and on the insistence of Ukrainian government whether these people come back. This is what I was well aware of this threat from the first days of war, and for this reason I was active in arranging these exchange schemes with foreign universities to make sure that that our students maintain institutional connection with my university, so that they are not lost to us. Mm-hmm.
The arrangement wasn't take our students and now they're your students. It was they continue to have a foot in both. They're hosted, say in Helsinki, but they are KNU students.
Yes, they remain our students. Yes. They are hosted in Helsinki. They take some courses in Helsinki. Not only Helsinki. We're just talking about Helsinki because Tatiana is here. Yeah. But at other places as well. But they still our students, and they can get diploma only from us. So it depends again on what happens with these forced migrants after the end of war. And also it depends on financial support and investment into Ukrainian higher education from the governments, from the countries which support us. There is a worst case scenario and there is a best case scenario for that. It also depends on how rebuilding of Ukraine will proceed. Ukraine has lost almost a lot of its advanced industries. Now Ukraine is exporting only raw products, agricultural products, and so on. I believe that even Ukraine's ability to produce military equipment, which Ukraine was able to develop and produce before the war, like the Neptune missiles, which destroyed Russian ship Moskva. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Neptune, the god of waves. Yeah. I believe even
you said the Moskva was promoted to submarine.
Yes, because Neptune is raining on the waters.
Right.
Well, so it's a loss of technical expertise. It's a loss of facilities, and we know from our experience of this war that the most reliable businesses, the businesses which give their hand to the government in this crisis, are domestic businesses.
Yes.
Not foreign businesses. But domestic businesses will be, you understand, quite poor after the end of the war. So it all depends how the rebuilding of Ukraine will be structured. If the inflow of foreign capital will take place. If it completely replaces it and outcompetes Ukrainian businesses. If people who fled Ukraine have incentives, incentives will be created for them to go back to Ukraine. what prospects will they face in the early years after the end of war? So there are numerous questions. And if Ukraine just moves downhill in, so to say, international division of labor, if it concentrates on production of some low-value, low-tech raw products, then high educational system of the scale that we had, of the quality we had, will not be in demand there. So, but this will be a bad thing for European security.
Yeah.
This will be a terrible thing. And I hope so much that European governments are aware that they need Ukraine not only as a shield, as a protective wall, military protective wall, but as a powerful economy, democracy on its eastern flank, which defends the entire European continent from dangers that still may arise there in view of the uncertainty of the Russian future.
Right. Timothy, thank you. Taras, Timothy, I'm going to ask you these same questions, and pretty soon I'm going to ask Peter and Pini to come in as we talk about the social covenant. But what role do you see? So the pair of questions is, what do you see the role of universities becoming, and do you see Ukraine's sense of national identity and sense of national cohesion changing, or maybe this is maybe it was there all along, and it was simply been revealed?
It's a bit of both. So in social science, we usually look at this vicious circle of kind of institutional, organizational change, which we call social structure, and then we talk about agency, people's motivation, needs, action, and we know that structure influences agency. But then people take this agency to change structures. So it's a vicious circle. And in Ukraine, we see from various, studies that Ukraine has been on this path of national uprising and development of trust and social capital for some years already. But the success of this path relies on the success of important structural changes, like Taras mentioned. Digitalization reform was very important to support people's agency. Decentralization reform was very important to give local communities.
Decentralization, can you just in a couple sentences, can you say what that was?
So for many years, Ukraine was highly centralized society. So the capital city, Kyiv, decided, in the government and the parliament, decided a lot of things, how Ukraine should be governed, how taxes should be collected, and how public goods should be provided in regions. But for the past 7-8 years, Ukraine has been decentralized, meaning that there are a lot of local communities that have political autonomy and economic autonomy to make decisions at the local level. So local communities can retain a very high tax base and spend money on local public goods. Also, with new gender quota for local elections, the political power became more diverse. And with the reform of public procurement, a lot of corruption was, minimized.
Reduced.
Reduced, and accountability was improved because now the public procurement is online through auctions. So there were quite a lot of reforms which supported agency and which made Ukraine, on this path of to becoming a new society. So you're right that it has been for a long time. It's not just started with this aggression. At the same time,
before we go forward, you said this was about 7-8 years ago. I want to note the timeline there. This was just in short consequence of the Revolution of Dignity. The
Yes,
people in the West may not know that name, but they saw the fighting at what is called Maidan, and that was really a shorthand way that a Westerner might think of it is Ukraine was deciding whether it was going to be joining Europe or allying itself in many ways back with Russia, and this was the point, that pivotal point of fighting. I know there was more going on than that, but that's kind of a surface description that I think a lot of Westerners think about that time, and things have changed in some ways because of the choices that Ukraine was able the autonomy that Ukraine was able to wrest for itself at that critical moment.
Yeah, and exactly. And there were some also historical events before the Euromaidan revolution which contributed to these developments. So you also asked about, what is the future and what is the role of universities in this future. I would say that now we're facing new challenges to this organizational, institutional, structural issues in Ukraine. So Taras mentioned about demographic pyramid. Yeah, we can also think about new types of inequalities. Today we were talking about the fantastic role of human capital. Where can we get human capital from now? Yeah, given the new infrastructural challenges, new inequalities, new displaced population, how can we make sure that we will get more of human capital to fix it and to make Ukraine a better society? So I think that's exactly what universities should do. We should think, what should we do now to incubate, to preserve human capital which we have and multiply it. And there are many political and policy responses to that. I guess I can speak on behalf of my university that we decided to make this new admission campaign this year. We will have a new admission campaign with zero tuition fees for students from deoccupied territories, from students whose parents died, for students who are displaced, and this was a very difficult choice for us because as a private university, we rely on tuitions, and we also rely on our research and donors as the sources of revenue. So we will have to redirect a lot of resources to admit new students. And also, to be frank, I know that it's on record, but I think I can be frank here that for many years we cultivated our brand to be sort of very selective and like a boutique university that selects a very small group of
the best of the
smart
best.
But that's a bad strategy during the war. The best strategy during the war is to make education accessible to many different groups of students, not only the best of the best, but to all. So we will admit students of different backgrounds, but also with different rates of success in their previous education, and we will try to offer them special programs to work with these students. So it's a complicated choice for us, because we have to pivot in our strategy. But I think that's exactly the policy that we should do to support Ukraine and Ukrainian communities. And I think that's what government should do, and government will do it because, as since it's about public good provision, and it is a job of the government to have some public good provision. Yeah. So I think we will do a lot of these activities, in the future. To support human and social capital, because it is very important for future agents of Ukrainians to be powerful, to rebuild the country. Yeah. So
before bringing our co-host back in to put this into the context of the Refounding Democracy larger project, I want to give Tatiana another opportunity to maybe respond, maybe reflect. You've said that you have have some interest in perhaps being yourself a professor someday. You're studying sociology and the way that society is organized. Do you have let's say, some hopes about the kind of Ukraine that is going to be emerging, and the way that its sense of social cohesion is maybe changing or strengthening, and also what the role of the universities is in that process?
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, Taras mentioned that as for now, universities try to just find a more flexible strategy, and that's what for me feels like this maybe in some kind of isolation from other structures. As I mentioned previously, like student organizations don't feel as mobilized, and faculties don't feel as connected. And maybe
by the way, let me note for our American viewers, the word faculty used in Ukraine and in many European universities would correspond to a department or a college at an American university. Sorry, just clarification. Please continue.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So maybe this short pause these organizations make to restructurize and stabilize their new work feels to some extent for students as some kind of, isolation. But I still hope for the best. And what I wish to see in future is connected organizations, and in some contexts, maybe entrepreneurial universities, where everything is connected and this social cohesion can be seen through partnerships, through not only like student events, but through this programs of mobility and educational projects. So I think it would be the best for the educational system.
Okay, so I hope Taras and Timothy are taking notes. You're going to get right on that. Yes, very good. I want to thank you, Tatiana. I want to invite Peter and Pini to join in. So the three of us have been having an extended set of discussions in the Refounding Democracy project about the concept of the social covenant and about how democracy requires a society that, I'll call it an hypothesis, that society, it requires that people have not just not just incentives and not just transactions with each other, but a real sense of social cohesion, that in order for a truly successful democracy to thrive. And clearly Ukraine is being tested in very many ways, but its education system seems to be responding with great fortitude. And this is important not just for human capital, not just for for demographics, not just for economic development, but also for, as Taras mentioned, the survival of democracy and the survival of democracy on Europe's eastern flank. So maybe starting with Pini, do you have any integrative thoughts about how anything that you've heard connects with our larger project about the social covenant and refounding democracy?
I have one note and questions to our panel here. So the note is, in emergency, solidarity increases. So that's great. The range of solidarity is increasing, the depth of it. But what happens after? What happens after the emergency? That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm more concerned about. I'm thinking about the long term, and some of these concerns, I'm going to list a few and ask you about them. They may feel too distant right now to be relevant, but they are important about the relationship between democracy and education. So I'm wondering if you are thinking about, especially now you're traveling, three of you are out of the Ukraine, you're looking at other education systems, and you're looking at, and you understand the economies there and their history. Are you thinking about the lessons from the West? And I would say, honestly, my feeling is many great failure in education in the West, education for democracy. Are you taking lessons? Are you thinking about the failures of educating for strong and stable and robust democracy and liberal democracy in the West? And what are you thinking about in terms of what it means to the future of education in Ukraine? And the one aspect, there is a separate thing that I do want to mention also. It's not about democracy, but it's about dealing with trauma. The West has forgotten that the memories of large-scale post-war trauma or war trauma have faded in the West. But you're going to face in Ukraine pretty large-scale trauma that, and some of it is going to be hidden, psychological trauma from displacement and loss of life and family and poverty. So how does the education system deal with that? I don't know if you're thinking about it. Maybe it's a bit too long-term kind of concerns, but I'm wondering if you're thinking about these things.
I do want to definitely hear from Peter, but I want to. These are really important questions about trauma and also training for democracy and what the education system playing a role in either of those. Do anybody of our three guest panelists want to jump in? Timothy.
Yeah. So the first question was about short-term versus long-term. A part of what is happening to Ukraine can be attributed to the rally around the flag effect. People come together, but then these ties disappear. We know from the history of Ukraine and from the sociological data, we know two counterfactual examples. So one example would be Orange Revolution, which happened in 2004, and the trust to president. So sociologists often ask these questions like, do you trust parliament? Do you trust president? Do you trust some formal institutions? And Ukraine used to be a very low trust society. So you can imagine very low trust to president. Then Orange Revolution happens. There is a spike. A lot of people trust to the president now. And then after 1 year, the spike disappears. There is no trust anymore because people were disappointed and there were no institutional, structural changes. And another counterfactual example would be trust to local government after this reform, which I mentioned some time ago, decentralization. So the trust to local government increased and never disappeared. It is still very high because there were successful reforms to support this trust. It's not just like a random event with spikes, they go up and go down. We can ensure these long-lasting effects that the rally around the flag can be transformed into, long-term successful cohesion, if and only if we can ensure some, important structural changes, economic changes, administrative changes, reforms. So I think we can make it if we can hard on implementing good policies. And this comes to your second question about experiences from all around the world. Different countries, they have different policies. And even within one country, here I'm in California now, and there are two universities, Stanford and Berkeley, private and public, who offer very different models on how to accept students and how to treat students. And there is debate. So what is education? Is education to shape elites, or is this for social mobility, to give people opportunities to go up in social ladder? So there are so many different experiences, and of course we want to learn from them. But I think and I go back to my previous statement that in Ukraine, we need to learn about relevant experiences in kind of educational expansion and public good provision. We need to provide education to as many people as we can. So we would need to learn from this how to scale up in how to scale up the provision of education to all social groups and categories. And I guess we should learn from both, European and American experiences whenever there are, good examples like Berkeley, for instance. And about trauma and mental health, well, look, everyone knows about this issue, but no one, well, I would say that we still don't really know what to do with that. We're just learning. For sure, it has to be incorporated in our curriculums, so sort of sensitive curriculums, how to discuss sensitive topics, how to behave in classroom. Some training for teachers and professors needed to be done so they can have early warning systems, how to recognize that students have trauma or colleagues have trauma. We now have a variety of responses. It really ad hoc, depends on the university. In our case, in our university, we don't have a psychologist on our staff, but we outsource it. We signed a contract with like Psychological Association of Ukraine, so we invite their experts on our campus, so students can talk with them and professors can talk with them. But this is just a very, kind of first response. We need to think how to incorporate all that in our curriculums, but it's a big thing. We still don't really know what to do with that.
Thanks very much. I want to ask Taras point blank about Pini's other question. Do universities in Ukraine, maybe does your university have a role to play in training for democracy?
Well, so you're asking about democracy, but in the original question, there was also the issue of trauma.
Yes.
And I want to add to this point. So my university, again, as an established old university, it has a multiplicity of departments or faculties, however you call them. And also among them, we have the Faculty of Psychology. And the response of the society to this experience and to the expectation of number of people having post-war trauma was very quick, thanks to the fact that the higher educational system is demand-driven. Last year in 2022, the number of applicants for psychology major exceeded the number of applicants for law school at my university. Oh. And the number of those who were enrolled in the end was unprecedented in the history of my university. So the reaction, and it's not my university's reaction, actually, it's a nationwide reaction to this situation, because the number of applicants for psychology was highest for entire history of Ukraine nationwide, not only for my university.
I'm going to give a quick shout out. We don't have anyone from Ukrainian Catholic University on the line today. I know that they also have put a lot of resources and attention quickly to trauma-informed care and psychological services in response to wartime trauma.
Of course, any university that has a psychology faculty in its structure is more flexible. Yeah. And we have, my university has a psychology service for faculty members and for students for 20 years, I believe. It was in place and was very active during COVID times. That's what I'm saying. COVID was a preparation ground, training ground for us to effectively survive the war. So this service was active during COVID to help people who felt isolated, lacking communication and so on. This is the first thing, and the second important thing concerning trauma is that referring to the Second World War experience, we have to remember that Ukrainian society was one of the most traumatized societies in the aftermath of that war, because Ukraine bore the brand of that war on itself, and the most terrible sins measured quantitatively took place in Ukraine. So the society itself, the people, of course, it was 70 years ago, but still, even people who survived that war are still alive, let alone their children who were born during the baby boom or in the post-war years. The society holds some experience of dealing with this in its collective memory, so to say. Of course, maybe it's not that successful. Dealing with that experience was more suppressive. It was more like suppression because of the Soviet approach and the strictness of the totalitarian society at that time. But still, the people who live in Ukraine had that experience, and more or less they know how to deal with it. So, moving back to democracy, I think that, well, Timothy mentioned all these things about prerequisites of Ukraine's democratic emergence in the years after 2014, about Orange Revolution and trust and so on. So Ukraine used to be democratic in its core, in so to say, on an invisible level. I interpret this is my approach to interpreting these spikes in trust, which then recede, is that in Ukraine people are used to trust other people rather than institutions, rather than formal structures. And so as long as they perceive a candidate as a human, they trust him. Well, or her, but we didn't have a female president so far. I hope we will. But as soon as the president starts to be perceived as a position, as a part of structure, support for him, trust for him goes down. So there are these two levels, formal and informal level. And it works everywhere, you know, about informal economy in Ukraine, or shadow economy, or whatever, you know, about this tales of some say even rampant corruption and so on. And there is this low-level everyday corruption, which in fact is also the part of effective resistance of Ukraine to Russian invasion, because it is in fact networking. Horizontal networking among people, among, as we call them, volunteers, who just call each other and they know what to do in their common interests, without any formal orders from above and without any formal structures and so on. So it's a long story. What I mean here is that beneath the surface, Ukraine, in contrast to Russia, by the way, and there are different, and there are some political and economic reasons for that, which are not to be discussed here. So below the surface, Ukraine was always inherently democratic. And to support this democracy, what we need to bring this democracy to the formal level. We need to reform institutions rather than society. Because institutions were inherited from the Soviet past. So it's institutional rebuilding which is on agenda for Ukraine, and I believe that for what universities can contribute to this, first of all, is the increase in the number of students studying social sciences. Looking back at the Soviet times, there were no social sciences. Why? The reason is simple. because to have like, why do you need sociology? Because there is something unmanageable, which is called civil society, which is called informal relations among people, and so on.
And we don't want that, and insofar as there are any questions, we've already answered them all. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So if CIA or KGB, sorry, I wanted to say KGB, CIA has nothing to do here. It's just a reference back to our previous talk. Yeah. So if KGB knows everything, it doesn't need to run surveys. It doesn't need people who interpret the findings from this surveys and so on. If there is no independent opinion, if there are no independent agencies in the society, we don't need social sciences. We need management sciences, as they were called in the Soviet Union. So I think that improved training in social sciences, in activism, in management too, in all the fields and professions which are somehow related to the operation of institutions will contribute to democratic progress of Ukraine. I'm not saying democratic transformation, because as I said, Ukraine is inherently democratic society. I'm saying only about the transformation of this institutional crust. Which is covering the magma of democratic society.
Excellent, yeah, great image, and that's a very optimistic, but I think a well-grounded narrative that the society intrinsically has deep democratic roots. Yeah, Peter, you've been patient. In the context of our Refounding Democracy project and thinking about the role of civil society in sustaining democracy, do you have any questions that arise from the Ukrainian experiences we've discussed it today?
Yes, so thank you for the Ukrainian guest, and extremely insightful. There is so much to digest that I might have to live for another 60 years to be able to process this.
May it be so.
I heard several years ago, 2-3 years ago, this quote called, and I don't know the origin, "Character is destiny." It impressed me enormously. And I'm now thinking about the character of Ukrainian people. Obviously, the whole world was astonished, surprised by the resilience of the Ukrainian people to this brutal invasion. I don't think many people believed that at this time today we're going to be where we are at. So I think that it depends on the character of the Ukrainian people and their history. So then I was thinking about all the challenges that some of you were listing. And I was wondering the extent to which Ukraine can leverage the character of the Ukrainian people in their defending their independence and liberty, democracy, and their nation in this war, in order to overcome the future challenges. And here, sociologists have a very special role in trying to figure out what about the character and history of Ukraine enabled it to do what it did And how can those elements of character be leveraged to confront challenges that you cited for the future? So that was one train of thought that I thought about. The other train of thought that I want to put on the table here in response to Atina's point and democracy, issues of democracy, the extent to which there is a general commitment to the social covenant, identity of Ukraine among the population, including the ones that had to escape, that are now abroad, and so forth. So these are the two issues that I wanted to put on the table, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
So I'm going to ask Taras actually to respond first on the question of character, the character of the people. You strongly entered into this theme when you suggested that the Ukraine is intrinsically a democratic society in its instincts, and that it's inherited some crappy institutions held over from the Soviet period that have been insufficiently reformed. Can you tell us a little more about how about its character?
Well, yes, it's a subject of a long talk, of course. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Well, it goes back, of course, it has deep historical roots, but the major factor is not only historical experience, but geography. Geography is very important in this sense. Ukraine's geography, you know, the Ukraine is famous for its fertile soils, which gave Ukraine for some time the nickname of the breadbasket of Europe. And this fertile soil enabled individual farming. So Ukrainian agriculture was based on individual farming in contrast to Russian and Belarusian agriculture, which was more collective. It's a well-known fact in Ukrainian social sciences. Everyone understands and knows that. For this reason, Ukrainian countryside was always more individualistic and, as a consequence, less prone to collective authoritarian or totalitarian tendencies. It's a simplistic explanation a little bit. There are a lot of facets which have to be added. Historical experience of different Ukrainian regions in the last 200 years. Ukraine was contemporary Ukraine's present borders is made of parts which were under Soviet Union for 70 years. Some parts were under Soviet Union for 50 years. So this assemblage of different experiences enabled Ukraine to survive, enabled Ukraine's independent character, Ukraine's love for democracy to survive in different places and to be supported by cultural actors, by activists, by intellectuals from newly added regions or regions which were not traumatized or where independent thoughts were not destroyed by totalitarian power. So there are many reasons, but in fact, in the end, it boils down to historical experience of frontier in the 17th and 18th century, and independent farming. Mm-hmm. And as you know, why farming is so important for, as you say, national character. Because cities are not demographically self-sufficient. Cities are always fed by migrants from countryside. So even if you change the face of a city, like Soviets did by encouraging migration from Russian core regions to Ukrainian cities during Soviet industrialization and urbanization. Even if you do this, with time, population change is taking place, and newly urbanized groups are coming from countryside, which is intrinsically individualistic and as a result democratic. So it works this way. And in fact, the uprisings, anti-authoritarian uprisings that we saw in Ukraine in the last 20 years were related to this population change in the cities, especially in the key city of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine.
It is, it's no doubt very oversimplified, but an American ear hears resonance when you talk about the importance of the individual farmer as a character in sustaining democracy, and of the frontier as a place where democracy thrives out of the shadows of heavy-handed institutions. This is at least the narrative that Americans tell themselves about themselves, that this is how our democracy took root. Obviously a very simple story, but it's intriguing that that you could say that a lot of and in the same time period, the 17th and 18th centuries, that this was a frontier area for a lot of settlements of farming communities. We in the U.S., of course, we tend to think of Europe was completely settled thousands of years ago, and we're the ones with the frontier. But it's not so simple. This actually was a frontier area. Geography and agricultural economy shaping national character in ways that are really interesting parallels. Timothy, do you want to chime in, please?
Yeah. So I think Taras told an excellent story, even though he was modest to say it's an oversimplification, but it makes a lot of sense also from the perspective of previous scholarship and research. I just want to add a little paradox on top of that. And, I want to acknowledge that my response is going to be biased because I'm a Ukrainian and I romanticize, Ukrainian history, but I think I'll do my best to refer to data as well. So the story of Taras was about agency, that people take things in their own hand and they in charge of their lives. At the same time, there is a cross-national comparative research about values, what people value or say that they value in their life. And there is this tradition from Ronald Inglehart, World Values Survey, when people in many, many countries are surveyed and asked questions about values. And there are papers that compare Russia versus Ukraine. And these papers usually show that in terms of values, Russians and Ukrainians are quite similar. They value similar things in their conservatism, except one crucial point, that in Russia, apparently people value self-enhancement, things like success, status, so some personalistic things. And in Ukraine, people often value social support of others. They care about supporting family or environment, things like that. So researchers call it social focus. And this is a paradox, that Ukrainians are individualistic in a sense that, they take things in their own hands, they have a lot of agency, and at the same time they value others, they value community, they value social ties, so they support others. And at the same time, in Russia, they're very, sort of collectivistic. They have a lot of organizations and institutions that are more authoritarian and put a lot of pressure and peer pressure and do not provide agency. But whenever people have a chance to have this agency, they offer things that related to very kind of egoistic, individualistic, self-enhancement motives. And I think, this is, again, I acknowledge it's a bit of simplification, but I think it really shows quite a lot about what is happening today in Ukraine. When people take a lot of things in their hand, they volunteer to support their community. And people in Russia are isolated and they either follow orders or run from their country.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So that's it's very interesting. But the combination of what Taras and Timothy were saying. Now, I agree with Timothy's characterization that there is a paradox here, but I wouldn't say it's a paradox, but rather a sort of like a perpetual tension that is always present in I think in both individuals and societies. Is the tension between the particular and the general. So you always try to reconcile which way to go. We humans are caught in this perpetual tension, and the solution is not one way or the other, but rather the right balance between the two. So in the case of Ukraine, the people are have individual initiative, but at the same time they have a sense of the value system is a sense of shared community. They understand, well, I have to reconcile my individual initiative and agency with the fact that I live in a community. So I have a commitment to that community. That hard part is how you reconcile these two aspects of us. And there are sometimes societies go in one direction, and that's what I guess you Timothy was saying about Russia, is that it's like basically a very centralized, centered society. And within that centralized centers, then the individuals say, okay, well, I'm going to care about my self-interest and myself, how far I can advance within this. And the rest is taken care of by this system, big system, social system. But the Ukrainians, on the other hand, I think have a sense of a self-initiative within the context of understanding that we live in a society, and therefore I have to have commitments to that society. This all relates to our project of refounding democracy in the sense of the relationship between the commitment to social covenant versus the sort of our own commitment to our own flourishing and well-being, and how you reconcile these two.
Excellent. Very well put. Folks, this has been a fascinating and rich conversation. We have been talking for a while, and it is time to wrap up. I want to give everybody, our guests especially, and also Penny, a last. If there's something you're just really itching to say, and you
yes,
really
I am itching to say
yes,
that in light of these last three meetings and
on Ukraine,
on Ukraine and meeting the Ukrainian guest, I have quite a lot of optimism about the fate of Ukraine in the future. The character of the people I met here for a brief period of time is superb. I just wanted to note that.
Absolutely agree. I want to also make sure that as we were talking about education and the future, the one who's on this call who's most likely to see the most of the future is Tatiana, and I want to make sure that you've got an opportunity to talk about what you'd like to see for Ukraine's universities and national fate.
It feels so refreshing to not really know what to say, because I understand that opportunities are endless and there are a lot of perspectives, but mostly we talked in the context, I think, of neoliberal perspective, when students are seen as customers and nation is seen as a customer of higher education. And I think I need a lot more time to reflect on it, but yeah, points of Timothy and Taras were great today, so thank you.
Well, thank
you all.
you. Penny, any last?
Yeah, I'd like to comment I was thinking about passing and just thanking everyone because really it was a great discussion and I learned a lot about Ukraine. I read a huge history book about Ukraine before I came here, but I'm still learning every day new things. And this was really great. But this thing about treating students and even the nation as a customer made me think about one thing behind my question that was not answered. And maybe we will leave it. Of course, we cannot discuss it further much. And that's the relationship between democracy and capitalism and the economic institutions. So I mentioned that my view, I kind of hinted that there is pretty great failures in democratic educations in the West over the last maybe 2 generations that have to do with democracy. And they are part of the reason why democracies are weakening in many countries in the West. And I was kind of asking you if you're thinking about that. And you said many things about the culture and about institutional structure. It's a separate, special kind of thing about the culture. But this question about the tension between capitalism and democratic education, it really worries me. And I'm really wondering how you guys think. I know it's not for today, but I'm leaving the question about these relationships and what you can learn from the West. Maybe you don't need to learn anything because you have another path that doesn't have that problem. I'm not sure.
Excellent. And a great thought on which to close and contemplate. Wanted to really thank our guests, especially for joining us today. Fantastic discussion. Thank you, Timothy Brick, Taras Simval, Tatiana Porosenko. And we are so pleased that you've been able to join us and talk about Ukraine and its challenges. And we are standing 100% behind you in this difficult time. So want to say we will actually do the last of our 4-part series next week. We will be live from Lviv in the southwest or the far west of Ukraine. We will be talking about sex and gender and LGBT plus issues in Ukraine and how that's evolving, joined again by Peter Lupu and I hope by Pina Benor. We'll see how what his schedule allows. But in the meantime, Timothy Brick, Taras Simval, Tatiana Porosenko, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Really great.
Thank you.
See you
Thank you all.
We hope next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.